Yeah.
We will begin momentarily. Good evening. At this time, I would like to call the December 3rd, 2025 meeting of the Board of Education to order. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item of business is the adoption of the agenda for today's board meeting. The December 3rd, 2025 agenda has been distributed to all board members. Are there any corrections, additions, or changes? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. With the agenda now adopted, we will move to the next item. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from November 5th, 2025, which was a board meeting, and November 19th, 2025, which was a work session. May I have a motion to approve these minutes? Thank you, Board Member Alexandria. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Kathy. Any additions, corrections, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The motion to approve the minutes from November 5th and November 19th carries. Okay, we do not have any public comments tonight, so we will move to the superintendent comments. So we welcome the superintendent comments, Dr. Porter.
Just moving around here. So good evening, board, staff, and community. I hope everyone had a wonderful recess and you enjoyed yesterday's snow day. While the holiday spirit is beginning to build, I want to emphasize that these next 2 weeks are extremely important, especially for our students. 14 instructional days before the recess, so I want to make sure that our students stay present, attend school, and stay engaged so that they close out this year as we go into the new year. A friendly reminder that the parent portal backpack is now available to all families. Think of the backpack as a digital filing cabinet that stores student documents such as report cards, assessment results, and school notifications. This tool is very helpful for everyone, especially our parents and caregivers. We don't want to, for our parents that don't want to wait for the report cards to arrive in the mail, they will have access electronically. The big piece there is that in order to get access, families simply need to activate their Infinite Campus account Information is available on our website as well as social media. High school information sessions for our 8th grade families will be held on December 4th at 6:30 p.m. at Mount Pleasant and on December 10th at 6:30 at Oneida. We did have to reschedule Central Park, which was scheduled yesterday. That will be on Tuesday, December 9th at 6:30 at Central Park. Our December job fair will take place on December 19th from 2 to 4 right here at Liberty. Our high school, just a couple of announcements, our high school theater students will be participating in an exciting opportunity. The Blue Rose Theater Company will host playwright Joseph Ahmad for the world premiere development of his play, Abandonware. His residency will begin next week during rehearsals, and our students will work directly with him throughout the development process, gaining invaluable professional experiences. The show will run in February, and Mr. Ahmed will return for the opening night performance on February 5th to lead a talkback session with both students and the audience. Last week, we shared a communication with our families, urging parents and caregivers to stay alert to rising social media trends, particularly the challenges circulating on TikTok. Some promote reckless, illegal, and harmful behavior. We provided resources to help families navigate these concerns and encourage them to stay attentive. Please also take a moment to review the calendar as we have many events taking place. I am looking forward to being at some of those events and looking forward to seeing many of you there as well. To our staff and community, as we enter an incredibly busy and often demanding holiday season, I want to continue to encourage everyone to practice intentional self-care. It's easy to become overwhelmed by the pace and obligations of this time of the year. But protect your mental and physical well-being is vital. Protecting your mental and physical well-being is vital. We must also recognize that while the holidays bring joy for many, they can be very difficult for others. I want to remind our entire community to be mindful of our colleagues, our students, and our neighbors who may be experiencing grief, loneliness, or stress. Let's extend extra grace, patience, and kindness to one another, and please take advantage of the resources available if you or you know of someone who is struggling. I encourage parents who have concerns about their children to reach out to our school counselors. We are here to help. Just want to highlight a couple of events that have taken place since our last public comment. Lincoln Multicultural Night was an amazing event, amazing food and fellowship. The Seat Center had their grand opening at Hades out in Albany. Many of our students are now running that particular program, so it's just a huge plug for Seat Center and the support that they provide to this community. I know our board president and myself went to the Mount Pleasant Harvest Fest, and that was an amazing event as well. Many of our families, and really just kudos to our staff, our leadership within buildings, and all of what they do within our community. I attended the Proctor's Recklessness, which was an amazing event of our students. We've got some amazing and talented individuals. And we also participated in the holiday parade, which was amazing as well. I'm using Bernice's amazing. But, and then Sycamore Collaborative also invited Dr. Kelly, myself, and Rebecca Hendricks to speak on behalf of the work that we're doing together as a partnership. That concludes my comments for today.
Thank you, Superintendent Kodo, and we will begin with SBR Cole.
I don't have too much to share, just I did go to Assemblyman Santa Barbara's student cabinet meeting on Monday. We were able to work together as a team. It was very, very eventful. Overall, it was a very good event.
Thank you, SBR Cole. And next, Board Member Kathy.
I was going to mention the Restless, I believe you meant to say,
Recklessness.
I believe you meant to say it was a Blue Roses Theater, not,
Which one?
what, Restless, wasn't it?
Recklessness was at the Black Bus Theater.
Oh, I didn't see that one. I said Restless at the Blue Roses Theater.
Oh, okay.
I thought that's where I saw you.
Reckless. I think it's reckless.
Well, whatever.
It's reckless.
It is reckless.
Reckless,
Yeah.
reckless. It was reckless, but it was at Blue Roses Theater, not Proctor's, right?
No, the Black Box Theater.
At the high school.
At Blue.
All right, we'll get it straight. It was there, and it was good. Always fun to see. And I commend the people who marched in the holiday parade as well. We had our dance troupe there. We had administrators. We had SFG. I don't remember how many schools. So that's always interesting to see and fun to see. It kicks off the season. So those are my reports tonight.
Thank you, Board Member Kathy and Board Member Jamaica.
Good evening, everyone. As some may know, nearly 300 Schenectady residents asked for a 5-year comparative suspension data, not because anyone enjoys paperwork, but because we know what the district's own numbers consistently show, which is Black students are suspended at nearly twice the rate of their peers. The district says it's committed to restorative practices, but promises without accountability change nothing. Hopefully, tonight's presentation will be a turning point, a chance to confront a longstanding pattern of marginalized students, particularly Black students and students with disabilities, being pushed out of classrooms through disproportionate suspensions and overly harsh disciplinary practices. We must be able to distinguish between real progress from the appearance of progress. We know that national research shows that students with disabilities face elevated disciplinary risks, and that the highest risk falls on students who are both disabled and racially marginalized, especially Black students and especially Black girls. The district will point to its investments, but what we're missing is equally important: implementation fidelity, staff competency and buy-in, quality control, youth and family feedback. Student and parent experience, along with the data that we are about to have presented to us, suggests gaps in several of these areas. Restorative practices are not a technical fix, they're a cultural transformation. They require trust, training, consistency, and transparent evaluation. Without structures for accountability, reforms risk being symbolic rather than substantive. What we're already seeing and what we may continue to see is predictable: marginalized youth being disproportionately excluded. It's been years of me raising these concerns about the racial disparities, and the district's own relative risk slides confirm what many have said. Black students face higher risk of suspension year after year. But we have to be clear. These disparities are not about student behavior, they're about how the system responds to certain children. The patterns in Schenectady mirror our national patterns in policing, prosecution, and incarceration. Our schools are reproducing the same racialized logic of criminal legal system, only earlier and with our children. Students with disabilities face similar risks, reflecting a broader social pattern of controlling neurodivergence rather than supporting it, because it's not simply discipline, it's selective criminalization. It's school-based expression of the punitive logic driving mass incarceration. When our district suspends more than 1,300 students every year with the same groups consistently overrepresented, it normalizes exclusion. It teaches that removal is a first response. It treats children, especially Black and disabled children, as problems to be managed instead of being supported. It is the school to prison pipeline. It's not a metaphor, it's a documented pattern. The data does not simply describe discipline trends, it documents racialized patterns of punishment. So why does this system respond to certain children as threats to be removed rather than human beings to be supported? Until that truth is addressed honestly, transparently, and publicly, our schools will remain a front-end sorting mechanism for the same carceral logic that it claims to resist, rather than institutions of learning, growth, and belonging. With that said, I look forward to us creating the change that is long needed.
Thank you, Board Member Jamaica and Board Member Alexandria.
No comment.
Board Member Vivian.
No comment.
I have several things I wanted to mention that I didn't mention at the last board meeting, but we did have a training that was open for the board at Climber and Infinite Campus. So I do want to thank those that were on the call, and several of you are here, but Natasha also did that presentation, and it was great because we got to see what parents see when they use Infinite Campus and Climber. So I want to thank those of you who are in the audience that did that. I do want to thank, I was at the parade as well, it was a lot of fun, and I want to thank Board Clerk Michelle because she coordinates all of it. So I want to thank you for all the work, and it was great to see Mount Pleasant, the high school, the freshman academy students dancing, and Mount Pleasant was dancing. It was really good to see everybody come together, and many people that were in this audience were also there. So it was just it was fun to see the community out and the families in Schenectady, so thank you. The Student Advisory Board, there were approximately, and thank you Dr. Kedley, she ran that, and there were many ELT folks that are here that were there too, and I can go through the list, but that will be all my comments. So I do want to thank those of you who were there. It was led by Dr. Kedley, and the SBRs, SBR Janice and SBR Stefan were there, yes, and they presented to the students as well. Again, about 70 students from all the school districts, and it was awesome to hear their voice and having them really engaged with, you know, some of the different topics that were happening in the school district. I know Dr. Cotto mentioned the Harvest Dinner. I do want to shout out Ann Robinson. She led that whole, I mean, it was amazing. There were at least 150 parents there. Again, Deputy Superintendent Caprio was there, Dr. Cotto, and many others that are in this audience, some of them that were there. I do want to mention the Ruby Bridges Walk, MLK. That was powerful. We walked from Sikkim all the way to MLK. It was Miss Savage and Christine Ewert who led that as well. And there were many, many community members there. There were the teachers, the staff, the parents. It was a very powerful moment. And the students did some performances also in the auditorium. It was powerful. There's so much. I also visited and spoke in Miss DeMeza's high school classroom about the board, and that was really great. The students had some questions, and I do want to thank Miss DeMeza. Then the last thing I want to mention, there was a community dinner that took place last weekend. It was, wow, it was led by LaShonda Blanks and community members, community leaders, families, paras, teachers, families were there. We were there as well. It was located in two churches, the Zion Church and also the church Liberty. So I'll pause there, but thanks to all the staff that make this happen. Thank you. So we will move on to the approval of the consent agenda. So the consent agenda includes items considered routine and approved together in one motion unless a board member requests that an item be removed for separate discussion and vote. Would anyone like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, so we will proceed to vote on the consent agenda items. May I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 6A through F?
Seven.
Thank you, Board Member Kathy. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Alexandria. Any discussion? I do want to quickly mention that 6F, the students did such a great job presenting to us at the last board meeting. We were really excited to hear about their trip to Senegal. So we wish them the best on that trip, and we hope to get a great presentation in French when they come back. I also want to mention that we do have some personnel folks that are here. I will say Octavius Cook, if you don't mind standing up. He's part of our Grow Your Own program, and he will now be the assistant administrator, principal at Mount Pleasant Middle School. So we want to congratulate him. That's amazing. And if there's anyone else that's
Yes,
in
we
the
got
audience,
Johnny that's in the audience. Johnny again, he's been working within the community, within many of our schools, but he'll be the head custodian here at Liberty.
Congratulations.
I also want to recognize Lori Timmis, who's granted her tenure today. So Lori Timmis, if you can stand. Jessica Valenti as well. She wasn't able to be here this evening, but Jessica was also proved her tenure today.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
One that I just would like to briefly say, directly to Mr. Cook. I am immensely proud of you, and I'm very, very happy for you. I can say just from the way that you were successful in reaching my own child, I'm genuinely and truly, truly happy for you, and I am honored. I'm truly honored for this opportunity for you. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Yes.
We also have Jonathan Cooley, another AP over at Mount Pleasant. I believe he's.
No, maybe I'm
Oh,
wrong.
we thought he was here.
No, which one? Okay, I just want to be sure we didn't miss him. He's here.
If anybody else is here.
All right. So now we will know.
Did we not, all in favor? Did I miss that?
I didn't write it down.
Good. So
We did.
No.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion to approve consent agenda items 6A through F carries. Congratulations. Okay, so now we will move to our next item on the agenda, which is the presentation of fostering a supportive school climate, analyzing discipline trends, and reviewing interventions. So this work is central to school learning and gives us a clear look at the data that guides our decisions. Board members had an opportunity to send questions in advance, and those will be addressed in the presentation. Additional questions can be raised during the Q&A, which will follow our 3-question protocol. You'll also see 4 guiding board questions that can focus on tonight's topic and help frame our conversations while still welcoming additional questions. And you'll see a copy in front of you, but it will also be on the screen a little later on. And also, Ms. Tote will have it on her slide. And finally, there has been interest in an audit of suspension practices. 2 board members have requested it, and it will be scheduled for a future agenda so that the full board can decide how to move forward. Tonight's data will help inform the decision on whether an audit is the best course of action. I would like to invite and welcome our presenters, starting with our Assistant Superintendent, Andrea Tote.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for having us. I have some other team members in the second row here who will be joining us, but I'll have them come up when it's time for them to present. Okay. All right. We always start with our district vision, tagline, and values. These are important because they keep us grounded and focused on our core values as an organization. The pillars of our strategic plan also help guide us on ensuring intentional and aligned priorities. You will see that the areas we review in tonight's presentation have a place in all of the 4 pillars. This is the framing the conversation slide for the board. It provides guiding questions and reminds us of policy alignment, and I'll give you a chance if you want to speak to it too, but in this case, 7313 is policy around suspension of students, 7314, the shortening of suspension of students, 7315, students presumed to have a disability for discipline purposes, 7690, discipline of students with disabilities, and 8140, diversity, equity, and inclusivity in education. There's also policy 7310, student conduct and discipline, which results in the annual adoption of the Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. So, you guys hear that? Okay, so the format of our presentation this evening will primarily review data in the first part of the presentation, both historical and full year data, as well as some of the data for Q1 comparing this year to last year at this time of the year. We'll highlight areas where we see growth along with opportunities for improvement. And then we'll move more into interventions, programs, initiatives that we have and continue to implement in order to impact student outcomes. Some specific data around those programs and interventions might be presented together with the intervention slides. So we're going to start with overall suspension rates. This is a more global view of our suspension data and then we'll examine Q1 specifically in an upcoming slide. This slide represents our overall suspension rates since 2021. We have been successful in making some incremental reductions in percentages each year with intentional work, which we'll discuss more in depth during the presentation. And the last bar shows where we currently stand at the end of Q1 at 16.2%. This slide is the same time frame and same data, but it gives you a breakdown of incidents and number of students involved in those incidents of suspension by year. It's another way to look at the overall suspension data. So for example, 2024-25 school year, there were 3,025 incidents of suspension involving 1,386 students, and that was a suspension rate of 15.3%. The relative risk ratio is the risk of one recorded group in comparison to the risk of other groups to experience any disproportionate outcome. A relative risk ratio of 1.0 means a recorded group faces no disproportionality, and less than 1 means underrepresentation of a recorded group. We've been calculating and using relative risk ratio as a data point since our work with NYU's Technical Assistance on Disproportionality in 2016-2017. Our data team is well versed in the calculation, and disproportionality is also part of our New York State accountability measures, especially for students with disabilities. This slide shows a relative risk trend over time when looking at our K-12 suspension data for full school year timeframes. In our district comprehensive improvement plans, we have set goals to try and keep relative risk lower than 2 and as close to 1 as possible for each recorded group. When we see elevated risk for particular recorded groups, It is important to reflect an action plan around our organizational beliefs, policies, and practices. Here are some examples of this. The development and implementation of policies such as those that you mentioned in slide 4. The work of the Code of Character Committee to make edits over the last few years, such as the elimination of subjective infraction codes like insubordination or disruptive behavior that can lead to disproportionality, along with the adding of restorative and therapeutic interventions into the Code of Character, as well as our resources, how we use those resources. If we are seeing increased risk for a certain recorded group, we must ensure that we are implementing resources and interventions for those students in order to mitigate the risk and increase protective factors. You will see a number of other examples during the presentation where we have been trying to do this. Yes. This slide represents our current demographic enrollment in this moment of time. As you can see, about 20% of our students are classified as having a disability. Just over 5% of our students are English language learners. 23.5% are Black or African American. 24% are Hispanic or Latino. 25% are Asian. 14.8% are white, and 11% are 2 or more races. This was just a reflection of our demographic data at the end of Q1. We're going to move now into elementary suspension rates for Q1. Last year, Q1 compared to this year, Q1. We start with elementary. We see similar patterns as last year with some slight increases at Zoller, Hamilton, and Yates. We will be unpacking this data with our building leaders, but I did notice that all 3 of these buildings do house some of our social development programs in special education. This next slide is another way to look at the same data. This includes the number of incidents and number of students involved in those incidents. The total number of incidents of suspension in elementary for Q1 this year is 76, and those incidents involve 67 students. Last year, there were 77 incidents for that same time frame involving 62 students. The suspensions on this slide are short-term suspensions, meaning 1 through 5 days. We did not have any long-term suspensions or hearing requests at the elementary level. This slide examines the elementary suspension relative risk for only Q1 last year as compared to Q1 this year. We do see some increases in risk for Black students, and despite a reduction for students with disabilities, we are still an elevated risk for that recorded group as well. We have been seeing a lot of challenges in special education, especially at the elementary level. We continue to see a high number of pre-K and K students who have significant emotional behavioral needs, some of whom have been identified as students with disabilities during the first quarter. We are reminded that students who are in K are students who were born during COVID isolation also, and that may also play a factor. As a reminder, our Code of Character requires building leaders to get authorization from myself or Deputy Superintendent DiCaprio if they need to suspend a student in grades pre-K to 3. These requests often involve physical aggression, and the team is usually already working with my department to implement intervention plans, make appropriate referrals, and partner with families. Sometimes the building leader requests to suspend for a day or less in order to pull the whole team together and adjust the plan. Building leaders often struggle with asking to suspend a student so young, and we know that these are increased risk factors. They sometimes will prefer to work with a parent and have a student go home early for a reset when they are engaging in certain behaviors. It is important, however, that we capture this data accurately, because in order to assess the problem and work towards solutions, we have to be transparent about the fact that sometimes students' dysregulated behavior may impact safety in a classroom and require the team to have some time to get together and work with families and plan on how to respond differently. Now we move to the secondary. These are the suspension rates for grades 6 through 12 for the first quarter. comparing last year to this year during the same time period. Keep in mind that Steinmetz Freshman Leadership Academy does not have data to compare for last year. However, ninth graders were included in the 24-25 data at Schenectady High School. The Schenectady High School at Washington Irving only encompasses 2 of our special class programs that we have housed there, so that data is a little skewed with a denominator of only 24. They had 7 incidents involving 5 students, as you'll see on the next slide. Here's a look at the same data, numbers of incidents and unique student numbers. We see an overall decrease of 63 incidents and 45 students being suspended at the middle school level from last year Q1 to this year Q1. At the high school level, we see an overall decrease of 48 incidents and 48 students being suspended from last year Q1 to this year Q1. When I went through and tallied up short-term suspension versus long-term suspension, which we're going to get into long-term suspension in a minute, we had an average of 95% of these suspensions are 1 through 5 day suspensions. When we look at relative risk ratio for secondary, we see a slight increase in risk for students with disabilities, a slight reduction for Black students. As a reminder, we are aiming to see those numbers below 2 and as close to 1 as possible. We're going to talk a little bit about intervention. This list is not all inclusive, but it does highlight a number of actions we have taken over time to impact student success and the data we're reviewing today. The areas in red are places we will dive a little deeper tonight, so I'll just review the blue briefly. My team is going to be presenting in the new year around substance and mental health data, as well as interventions and initiatives. That's why we didn't focus on that deeply tonight. You already heard from Dr. DeVries on the K-12 Comprehensive School Counseling Plan and how we added school counselors to the elementary buildings in 22-23. We've spoken at length over the past year about added upgrades to safety and security. We are working with the Capital District Regional Partnership Center on Equitable Behavior Systems and Disproportionality for Students with Disabilities, which includes us being part of a targeted support group where we collaborate with other districts on this work. A team of us participated in a session with other districts in October. We'll be regrouping in December with them again. We actually found during that first session in October that we had a lot more resources and protective factors in place than some of the other districts did. But this will be ongoing work throughout the school year, especially as it pertains to looking at suspension and disciplinary practices for our students with disabilities. We shared work over the summer around the relaunch of the Trauma Sensitive Schools Institute. And we recently contracted with some behavior interventionists. We've got some board certified behavior analysts that are working with us in order to provide embedded professional development and consultation to some of our classes, especially those that support neurodivergent learners. We also arranged for training the last 2 summers and certifications for a number of our teachers and paraprofessionals who work in our autism strand classes to become registered behavior techs, or RBTs. We have a CASEL aligned and evidence-based social emotional learning and bullying prevention curriculum through second step at the pre-K to 8 level. And we have also been working to tighten our protocols and trainings around threat assessment and DASA procedures. I wanted to share an overall look at some of the resources we've added over time in order to increase interventions and protective factors for students. Some most notable have been the increases in the school psychologists to provide dedicated Committee on Special Education chairpersons, while we have separate school psychologists that are working with buildings on implementing multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. This allows staff to benefit from their expertise in areas like behavior intervention, executive functioning, and supporting various learning needs. We also have significantly increased our restorative practice positions despite having several vacancies currently. We increased our diversion clinicians to support intentional shifts made to support students serving 6 or more days of suspension. I'll be talking more about that in a moment. We have also seen a significant increase in the numbers of paraprofessionals and teaching assistants to support students with disabilities. We intentionally added a program para to both our 612 and our 812 social development programs last year after we saw them really struggling to support student behavior and regulation. When a code of character violation occurs at the most serious levels, most often we see this with physical violence, weapons, or drugs, students may be brought to a superintendent hearing and issued a suspension of 6 days or more. Present at the hearing is the student, the hearing officer, who is also an attorney from BOCES, the parents or guardians, the building administrator, sometimes an advocate, and any witnesses. The hearing officer follows a legal script, and both parties are able to tell their side of the story and prevent witnesses and evidence. If the student has a disability, a manifestation determination also occurs, where a member of the special education leadership team determines whether the incident was a manifestation of the student's disability. And if that happens in that case, the student will go back to school without further suspension, and a CSE usually happens to look at other interventions unless it involves serious bodily injury or drugs or weapons, in which case they can be suspended further up to 45 days in order for the CSE to take some actions around whether it's placement or program. Upon conclusion of the hearing officer reviews the code of character and makes a recommendation to the superintendent. A review of the student's anecdotal record is also taken into consideration, meaning their attendance, previous behavior data, and academics. If they're issued an additional suspension by the superintendent, they will most often serve it in the diversion program, which is housed in each of our secondary buildings. We began using a diversion program model for students back in 2016, but it has significantly evolved over the years. Students previously were suspended for longer periods of time, often measured in weeks rather than days, and the program was housed at Washington Irving. In 2023-24, we opened programs at the secondary home schools and piloted any suspensions of 20 days or less being served at the homeschool building rather than Washington Irving. After 1 year, we saw positive data in regard to students attending their program more regularly, being more connected to their homeschool supports, and earning abeyance. And abeyance is a fancy term for an early return, with less recidivism. In 24-25, the school year, the building leaders actually advocated to have all suspensions of 6 days or more to be served at the building. So that is what we started doing. We actually have very few students unable to serve their suspensions of 6 days or more in the homeschool programs. In the event that there are concerns over safety, we may start a student on home tutoring and work their way into the school-based program as a bridge before a full return. Those are for incidents, if we had a student bring a gun to school, for example, we wouldn't start them off in the school program. We increased our diversion supports in these programs this year. I now have 4 clinicians, as you can see on the flyer up there, who work directly with students in these programs. Each program also has a teaching assistant and another social worker or restorative practice specialist attached to the program. The students attend 3 hours per day. They get academic support and social emotional support. When they enter the program, they do an intake, which involves a parent meeting and the students taking an assessment called a MAISY screening, which is a Massachusetts adolescent screening instrument. It helps us to identify both risk and protective factors. A treatment plan is then developed and includes evidence-based interventions such as anger management training, substance abuse treatment. We recently had all of our clinicians trained in Teen Intervene, so we can do some more of that in-house rather than having to refer out, and a restoration plan to repair any harm. As the student works through their treatment plan, if they are making progress and attending the program regularly, they can often earn an abeyance or early return from suspension. The goal is to have students learn from their mistakes, return to a supportive structure with new tools, and not have any reoccurring code of character violations that bring them back to a hearing. When we look at the entire 24-25 school year, there were a total of 222 incidents involving 236 students that were brought to superintendent hearings in 24-25. when we review how many students, after serving a suspension of 6 or more days in our diversion programs, came back for another hearing the same school year, we found there were 41 students in that situation. Sometimes when we see a student come back for a second hearing, the consequences can be progressive, meaning they may be assigned to stay in diversion a little longer for a more comprehensive treatment plan. Our recidivism rate was 17.37%. We will continue to work toward reducing the total number of students coming to superintendent hearings, as well as decreasing our recidivism rates. For just over 82%, or 195 students, participation in our diversion program one time was successful in keeping them from coming back during the school year for another incident. This slide reviews a longer range history of relative risks for incidents leading to superintendent hearings and 6 or more days of suspension. When you look overall at the years, you will notice that students with disabilities risk has been closer to 1.0, and Black students has been elevated over 2.0 for the past 4 years. I looked back even further to some of my older presentations, and in 2016, I noted that 6+ days of suspension, we had a relative risk of 6.0 for Black students. While we have made strides in reducing risk of 6 or more days of suspension for Black students, we still aim to ensure we are getting below 2.0 and closer to 1.0 by ensuring students have the supports that they need and that we are increasing protective factors. At the end of the 24-25 school year, Tyrone and I worked exclusively with the secondary administrators to look closely at the data around those students who receive 6 or more days of suspension and to plan accordingly for this school year. So far, our hearings are reduced, so hopefully we will see that trend continue, as you'll see in this next slide. When we look at suspensions of 6 or more from Q1 last year compared to Q1 this year, we see an overall reduction of incidents and students being suspended for 6 or more days. Last year, we had 59 incidents involving 79 students in Q1. This year, we have had 41 incidents involving 53 students. We are pleased to see a reduction in trending in the right direction. In fact, this has allowed our diversion clinicians to support more preventative work. I meet with them every other week, and some of the work that they've been doing in the buildings are running social groups and trying to do preventative interventions so that kids don't end up with them on long-term suspensions. And this is the first year I've actually seen us be able to do a lot of that and not be flooded with the actual crisis interventions. One last data point around suspension of 6 or more days: when a student earns an abeyance through the diversion program, it means they are progressing through their treatment plan. They're consistently attending program, and the team feels that they can safely return back to school on abeyance. There is a plan to continue wrapping around the student upon return so they are supported. This slide shows the number of days of suspension that were issued to students and then taken back due to them earning an abeyance in the 24-25 school year. As a reminder, in 24-25, there were 222 incidents involving 236 students who were issued a suspension of 6 or more days. Diversion and abeyance options helped to reduce suspension for those students by 444 days. I'm now going to invite our Assistant Director of Student Support Services, Angela Pasquizo, up. She's going to talk about 2 of the areas that she directly oversees, to include restorative practices and therapeutic intervention in schools.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Good evening.
So I'm going to start with some updates on our restorative practice team within the district. And it is linked here, our menu of services, and our team offers an array of services which are all in that menu, including conflict coaching, mediation. They support with accountability projects and oversight of that, which is something that we do with students who may be either returning from a suspension, or sometimes, which I'll talk about in a minute, we can use those to avoid a suspension when they do some accountability work around any harm they may have caused. The team also provides professional development and also helps to facilitate and train staff on running community circles within their buildings. As Andrea noted on one of her previous slides, we have increased from 14 RP specialists full-time last school year to 23 positions this school year. We have had some difficulty filling all of those positions for this school year with qualified candidates, and we have 7 openings currently, which we are still working to fill. Each member of the team is assigned to a specific building, and they work to support that building leader in building capacity around restorative practices while providing direct service to both students and staff around this menu of services. So working directly with students, but also providing coaching and modeling for staff and teachers as well. The team also conducts a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 training for staff in the district, and it's offered several times throughout the school year and over the summer, and we've gotten really good feedback from all the staff who have participated in that. And at our recent superintendent conference day in November, we developed a 1-hour restorative lesson, an activity that was facilitated with all staff throughout the district at the same time, which was really awesome. We got good feedback on that as well. A new initiative this year at Mount Pleasant Middle School and at Cade Elementary School is the implementation of peer mediation programs. In the beginning of October, students in grades 6 through 8 from Mount Pleasant, which are pictured on the slide here, they participated in a 3-day training with Mediation Matters, which is our community dispute resolution center. And they learned conflict resolution skills, active listening, and reflective questioning skills to guide their peers through the mediation process. And then Kane Elementary participated in this same 3-day training. They had 20 students that also participated in November. This was made possible through an initiative between the New York State court system and our community dispute resolution centers. And all the adults from those buildings that are coordinating the peer mediation programs also got to receive a 3-day training over the summer as well. And we continue to look into additional grant opportunities to implement peer mediation programs in other buildings. So this year we have worked on refining our data collection process to ensure that we're capturing the interventions facilitated by the RP specialists within our Infinite Campus student information system. So this data was pulled from Infinite Campus, and it shows from Q1 from this year all of the restorative interventions that have been facilitated by staff so far this school year. We're working on more efficient ways to be able to capture impact data, which can be more challenging because there are often, as we've seen so far in this presentation, multiple layers of supports that we're putting into place for students. One example of how we've started and will continue capturing some impact data, as I mentioned before, with that accountability project piece and some of our other interventions, we are able to log whether or not that specific intervention helped to avoid a suspension for a specific student. So it's something that we began tracking and that we will continue to track and analyze to have some comparison data. Also, the district has a grant, and we are working with BOCES on something called a resource allocation review. And this process is helping us consider ways to more effectively measure our return on investment data for specific positions such as the RP specialist. This is an area of focus for us this coming school year. As you can see, our RP specialists do a lot of community and relationship building with students through our check-in connects and our circles. They're also doing a lot of conflict coaching, pre-conferencing, and mediation. And as Andrea mentioned with the diversion counselors, our RP specialists are also doing some of those preventative groups to teach skills to the students. We're hopeful that we will find success in being able to add to this team so we can maximize this resource in every building. And lastly, I'm going to talk about our TCIS, which is our Therapeutic Crisis Intervention for Schools. And as a reminder, this crisis prevention and de-escalation model comes from Cornell University. And it's the model that we use to ensure that staff are trained in de-escalation, as well as appropriate physical restraint techniques in the case of imminent risk of harm. So we have expanded our training team, and we now have 16 certified trainers in the district from various bargaining units. We are planning to have Cornell return to us here over the summer to ensure that all of our trainers stay certified and that we have the required refresher training that we need. And we are also having them come to do an initial train the trainer training over the summer so we can add more trainers to our team, building the capacity to train more staff. We currently have 341 staff members across the district that are currently certified right now in TCIS. And we have certain positions and programs where we require this certification, such as in some of our self-contained special education programs and on our safety teams within the district. We've been able to incentivize taking this course and maintaining the certification for staff who work in social development programs, as well as for building administrators. We also have been working hard to ensure compliance with the New York State Ed regulations and district policies around restraint, seclusion, and use of timeout. We have seen an increase in the development and implementation of individual crisis support plans and the facilitation of the required incident debriefs after any incident of restraint or use of timeout. Our documentation systems have improved, and we now capture all of this data in Infinite Campus, which allows us to report to the New York State Ed Department and look at our trends more readily so we can provide support to students, buildings, and programs. We also had a group of our trainers recently certified in TCIF, which is Therapeutic Crisis Intervention for Families, and we are piloting our first course starting in January for staff members who are also parents or guardians of students in district so that we can work through the curriculum and get their feedback. And then we will plan to increase the number of classes that we offer to families in the community in 2026. I'm now going to pass the presentation over to Dr. Leah Kedley, who will give us some updates on the Department of Innovation, Equity, and Engagement.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So as we, hopefully we all know, the IEE Department, Innovation, Equity, and Engagement exists so that we as a team can work to be the bridge between home and school. It's such an important and critical piece, and we are constantly looking for ways for us to improve our outreach with our families in a proactive manner, shifting our approach with our families and community and students, and building stronger relationships. As board member Vivian articulated with Octavius, you know, he was able to create a great, strong relationship with her child, and that has made a difference in, you know, the way that maybe school feels. So, and we hope to continue to do that with our outreach. So we continue to build our capacity as a team, getting to know our families more deeply, being responsive to their needs. We've had previous board meetings where you've heard about all the different ways that this particular department is in our schools with our food pantries and our outreach, Sycamore Collaborative with the mobile food pantries, and even offering home delivery opportunities and just as other ways to help bridge that piece between the home and the school. So as a result of these different efforts and being responsive, we are improving the relationships that exist between our parent liaisons and our families, as well as demonstrating different ways for our school team members to also create stronger connections and relationships between our students and families. So we have, you know, a lot of these engagement efforts in place. We've got different levels of support that are in our schools. Parent liaisons across all but 2 campuses are all filled at this moment. We've expanded to include SFLA in Mount and Van Corlear this year. So we now have 8 established community schools in the official capacity, but I've always told people we really operate as a community school district because, again, we have many of the offerings that exist within a community school model in all of our schools. You know, and we'll continue to look to do that in as equitable of a manner and fiscally responsible manner. We have the Parent Action Committee that is offered through the Family Opportunity Center. I know they have one of their meetings tomorrow. We have the Parent Empowerment Center, which is hosted by LaShonda Blanks and the Parent Empowerment Center out of the high school, and those are happening monthly. We also have Skin Equity, in which I'm a co-chair with a community partner, Tasha Hudson, in which we're offering different ways to outreach and have that connected partnership in community to look at what issues are surrounding us and within community that impact our students and families so that we can continue to be aware and working more collaboratively as a whole community, not just as the district. And of course, we can't have any of this information out there to you without us also taking a look at the DEI work that this district has done in the past. As you know, this is my second year in this role, and so I've spent this past year taking a deep dive into all of our data and the previous work that's been done prior to COVID, as well as since then, to gain a better understanding of what's been in place. I will give a shout out to Oriana Miles, who has an extremely comprehensive file that she had created and has tons of information that was used and out there that's still relevant and very good. So, she's one of the team members continuing to help with this work, as well as quite a few other members of the subcommittee. But as a result of this work, we have figured out a newer plan for a differentiated approach to be able to offer asynchronous opportunities across the district at all the different levels. So we know that we have many who need that Equity 101, learning about their own selves, learning how they show up in spaces, but we also know many are ready to take this next step and really learn how to be advocates and to have advocacy lead to change, transformative change. And so we also want to equip those folks with the right tools. So this is in development with the hope of a true launch and a menu of options and an array of professional learning opportunities for this following school year. It is an undertaking, but we're committed to doing this, and there's a lot of energy around it. One of the community partners that I've already reconnected with is our United Way, and some of you recall there was a 21-day challenge that was in place. It might have been around COVID, and that was a high quality, very comprehensive training. It's still all available. So I'm working with Dave Cragen to make that possible on our Frontline platform so that we could relaunch that into our district and teachers can get CTE credit for participating in that. And again, this is our way of trying to make sure we're putting opportunities in front of folks so that professional learning does happen, because equity work is self-work, and we have to make sure that we're looking at ourselves in order for us to be aware of when we show up in spaces and we are able to make really sound choices, okay? And then, again, we, as President Rivera shared, she was able to be a part of our Student Advisory Council, which we had on Tuesday, and we will have those last week, right? Yeah, snow day threw me off, but yes, or Monday. So, but we have a lot more opportunities coming up. We've got 3 more for the year, and we've tried to align gathering student voice to content that the board is also reviewing so that it's in alignment to what it is that you're talking about and doing and having a direct connection for that. So that's one of the ways in which we're really trying to make sure that there is a connection back to what is going on in this district, as well as making sure you're in the know. We've also had conversations around forums being in place. I've been taking notes during the different board meetings around topics that come up so that those can be more proactive. Again, making sure that we're putting topics in front of our families that you are hearing are needed, as well as that we feel would be good pieces of information to be out there. And then some of the additional programs that we have in place but are continuing to kind of relaunch and be reinvigorated. So we've recently moved Billy Kent into the role as program manager for My Brother's Keeper, and we've also appointed Octavius Cook as a support person in this work. And both members, gentlemen, have been engaged with MBK since 2018. So Octavius was actually a part of it as a student at Union College, and so he was really looking for the opportunity to stay engaged, but in a support capacity versus leading that work. And then Billy is really excited and has been a part of it since the beginning of the joining Schenectady. So this year, and since he's started the role, he's already hit the ground running. He's actively working to have some structures in place in all of our schools for support of our young men, especially in all of our middle schools and the high schools. And then we have lunch groups that are forming in each of our elementary schools and identifying an ambassador to be in all of the schools. We have integrated more of our planning and dollars to also support district literacy initiatives, and we're looking forward to continued partnership with the teaching and learning department and team and continuing to help push those initiatives forward. And we've also had Shades of Sisterhood, which launched last year and was piloted in a few of our schools, up and running again this year. They've already met a few times. We're really pleased that they're in all 3 middle schools. SFLA and the high school. And they've already identified a handful of young ladies in each of these spaces, and they've met a few times. Continuous recruitment is occurring to bring these young ladies together for sisterhood and development. They want to also participate in community service opportunities. We're finding ways in which to integrate college visits and greater exposure to things beyond our Schenectady environment. With the loss of some of our grant funds, that's getting more challenging, but we're finding ways in which we can make those things happen. These two programs, MBK and SOS, are opportunities where we are honing in on the needs of our Black and Brown students in a positive and uplifting manner and continue to develop stronger and meaningful relationships within the school day. We want all of our students to have trusted adults, and when confronted with challenges or just the need for additional help, they'll have someone they can go to. And now I'd like to invite Director Christina Howard to the podium here, who will share some more about her partnership and the work she's been doing with the Office of Teaching and Learning and building leaders to implement the multi-tiered school system. Systems of support.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As Dr. Kedley mentioned, my name is Christina Howard and I'm the Director of Student Attendance and Behavior Intervention with that multi-tiered system of support focus. This is a newly created position that I moved into on August 18th of this year. The position differs from prior position of Assistant Director of Student Attendance that was held by Marcia Ranieri in multiple ways. First, I'm not only focused on attendance, but behavior intervention has also been added to my role. In addition, the multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, is one of the major changes to this position. So similar to the work that Dr. McFarland has been doing with academics, my priority since I started has been on working with building leaders to create systems for attendance and behavior designed to ensure that we're looking at all three of the tiers and planning for students by using current data in a systematic manner so that we can match student needs with research-based interventions. The position has also involved some focus on data cleanup and ensuring that what's going into Infinite Campus is accurate. Another area of emphasis this year has been on strengthening data analysis and reinforcing team-driven leadership and implementing a continuum of evidence-based practices. So as you can see on this slide, there's a picture of our MTSS guide. It can be found on our website. It's the framework and blueprint for the work I'm doing in partnership with the Office of Teaching and Learning and with our building leaders. I've listed some examples of the ways in which we've been trying to strengthen data analysis across the buildings. So starting this summer, Dr. DeVries, Dr. McFarland, and I worked with buildings to review the previous year's attendance and behavior data. Then we action planned with their positive behavior intervention and support teams. It's an evidence-based tiered framework for supporting students' behavior, academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs. We use the district data protocol to analyze the data and create action plans. In this case, it helped us to identify areas of focus at the tier 1 level so teams could be intentional about planning for the upcoming school year. So an example of that work, many of the elementary buildings during this process realized that their average daily attendance rates on half days decreased from full day attendance. So buildings were coming up with creative ideas to get students excited about coming in and really focusing on attendance around those half days. Other summer work included creating templates in a central location for building leaders to identify the dates and times for key meetings throughout the school year, as well as identifying the members of specific teams. This is in alignment with the expectations in the MTSS guidance manual. It also helps our district administrators and members of our multi-tiered system of support core team provide coordinated planning and implementation in various locations throughout the school year. In fact, at the next principals meeting, Ms. Tote Freeman and I will be using the same data protocol with building leaders to review Q1 attendance and behavior data with principals so they can process the data before they lead the meetings with their building level teams. Finally, another example includes professional development for attendance and engagement specialists. I've also been focused on empowering them to use data to drive decision making. It started with our first professional learning community, where we reviewed the new accountability system for attendance, and I made sure that each of them understood the various levels and how buildings will be measured. During Superintendent's Conference Day, I was able to bring attendance paraprofessionals and attendance and engagement specialists together, and we worked with the Capital District School Improvement Association on how these teams can use the multi-tiered system of support framework to create positive student outcomes. This meeting did reveal that a lot of time is currently being spent on Tier 3. So my goal moving forward is to ensure we're working within the full MTSS framework and looking at all 3 tiers to more effectively influence the data. Another focus area is reinforcing team-driven leadership, which entails improving systems and structures of collaboration and communication. So there are several ways that our team is supporting building leaders and creating a systematic process for using students' data. The first example is the work Dr. DeVries and I are doing with buildings to review their behavior and attendance data in relation to their Devereux student strength assessment data, and that's basically a screening for behavior that we do 3 times a year. We just completed the first round of that. This process is focused on looking at the Tier 1 data in order to create building-wide plans that address what we're seeing. Dr. DeVries and I at that time also look at fidelity data during this process. So we look at things like our teachers on pace with our second step curriculum and the lessons that should have been taught. Are they collecting data for PBIS, which is that positive behavior intervention and support? Are they implementing Tier 1 strategies to proactively plan for students that are in front of us? Recently, we reviewed the behavioral and DESA data for a building that revealed some of our 5th grade students were reported as having the least amount of strengths, but they also had the least amount of behavioral referrals. So digging in with the team, that seemed a little odd because our 5th graders should have had the most exposure over time to our second step lessons and other Tier 1 interventions. But when we looked a little bit more completely, the data revealed that this building's 5th grade classes consisted 25% new students to the building. So we were able to recommend to the PBIS team that they come up with a plan based on some of the key competencies measured in the DESA, so that we can strategically provide additional support for the 5th graders and work on some of those skills that were lagging according to the screener. The effectiveness of this plan can be reviewed in future screenings when we're able to assess if 5th grade students have shown an increase in strengths identified. I also wanted to mention that one positive trend we're seeing with the DESA data is that most buildings, 14 out of 18, were not demonstrating an upside down MTSS triangle. So in other words, there were more students being rated as typical or showing areas of strength than those rated as having high areas of need. That shows that some of the previous work on the slides we've talked about in this presentation are having positive impacts on our students. In addition, Dr. McFarland and I are also working with several building teams on the MTSS or multi-tiered system of support process and ensuring that there are clear systems in place that allow students to feed up into that Tier 3 or school-based support team level. This requires teams to meet regularly and look at student data, to create some intervention plans that will be used to collect the data and to see the response individual students or groups of students are having to the intervention selected. After several cycles, if students are not responding to the interventions, that data is used to initiate the student-based support team referral process for the students who are still struggling. This process also includes a review of Tier 1 fidelity data prior to creating an intervention, which could include classroom management plans, curriculum pacing maps, and other Tier 1 items related to attendance, behavior, or academics. Depending on the student, we kind of look at where they're falling. Right now, we're supporting several buildings by actually pushing into these team meetings to model and participate until we see systems are better established. Finally, the last area we've been looking at is around implementing a continuum of evidence-based practices So this focuses on strengthening Tier 1 core instruction, and it happens in collaboration with the Office of Teaching and Learning. Last year, building and district administrators identified several high leverage practices that are the priorities for this work. This year's walkthrough form and bullseye is focused on those practices. In addition, the Student Support Services team helps with this work by monitoring Tier 1 implementation and providing feedback as we meet on student data in buildings and through the implementation of that multi-tiered systems of support. For example, before setting up any individual student interventions, teams are required to look at all 3 levels of support to determine where the focus areas should be. As part of this work, I've been collaborating with my district leadership team members to create a selection of research-based interventions for attendance, behavior, and academics for all 3 tiers. This way, when building teams come to the table, they have a menu to use when planning next steps. These tiered documents have received positive feedback from the teams that we've been working with because it identifies many of the resources we have in the district in one place so teachers don't have to research or search for intervention options. Instead, the meeting time can be spent planning which strategy would best support the student. This allows for the process to become more data-driven and target specific skills and appropriate interventions. I'm really excited about this work and enjoy reviewing the data and working with schools to create systems. It's critical work because development of systems with building leaders and reviewing data in that systematic way is really essential to ensuring no students are overlooked or lost in the larger system. Thank you.
Before we proceed with questions, I would just like to remind the board of our expectations. Maintain a focus on what's best for our students, one mic, one voice. Maintain a respectful space demonstrating civility, courtesy, and professionalism. Listen with an open mind and allow all viewpoints even when we disagree. If we stray from the agreements, I'll try to redirect us, okay? And also, I just want to remind everyone of the meeting protocol. We want to honor everyone's perspective, so we have structured this discussion to ensure each board member has meaningful time to ask questions. For the first round, each board member, including SBR Cole, is invited to ask up to 3 questions. Members are welcome to pass. After the first round, we will re-invite anyone who passed to ask their questions, and then we will open it up. Comments should be held until after the 2 rounds or the first round of questions, unless a brief comment is needed to frame your question. If time permits, comments can be shared at the end. As shared in the weekly President Board updates, the board will have about 35 minutes for discussion. If needed, we will allow an additional minutes or 15 minutes or so during the board discussion portion of the agenda. Additional questions can always be submitted via email. They can be submitted to Board Clerk Michelle, which is our standard protocol for all presentations. If someone begins to move away from the questioning protocol, you may be asked to kindly state your question. So we will begin. Any questions for board members?
Is it just that nobody wants to go first?
I have a question.
Okay, Board Member Alexandria.
Thank you for the presentation. My first question is there evidence, do we have evidence that the increase in staffing that was implemented has helped with our numbers?
I think kind of what Angela was mentioning around that resource allocation, we see how important it is to be able to isolate some of the different resources we have and make sure we have protocols of data collection and analysis to know what's the return on investment. Because, I mean, we've been very lucky to be able to add all of these resources, but down the line, if we had to make hard decisions, we want to be able to know what are the things that are impacting progress the most. And I do think this has been an area of challenge for us because we've been adding a lot of things, a lot of resources, a lot of structures, a lot of staff members, and so sometimes unless you're really drilling down to a particular student outcome, like you see overarching improvements in data, but you're like, well, was that the added counselors or was that the added RP, or, you know, because we're layering so many different things. So we're trying to get to that, but I do think it's sometimes hard to really isolate it.
I would be interested in seeing that, like have our numbers lessen with like how many removals we have, how many suspensions we have on that, so thank you for that. my next question is, have we received any feedback from any of our students that are Black and brown students that have experienced discipline? And how have we used that to shape our intervention if we've done that?
I mean, I think that whenever we're engaging with a treatment plan around, we always really want to have a consequence go along with some kind of intervention. So we don't believe that suspension alone will cure anything. We really want to make sure we think about what's the root cause of what's happened and how can we make sure that there is some kind of intervention. Sometimes it's as simple as a check-in connect or a re-entry meeting to talk about who are your protective factors in this building. It might be something that's a little more complicated than that, depending on the situation. But I think student voice in that process is always really important. When I think about diversion, that Maisie assessment that they take is a digital assessment that the student takes on their own, hopefully in a way where they can feel honest. We're very careful about how we share that information, and it spits out sort of themes of where there's protective and risk factors so that we don't end up in a meeting where we're like, hey, you answered this to this question, and we're talking more around, looks like we might have some reasons to think that an intervention around substance use might be important without getting into like how they answer the question. So I think student voice is super important in that process. I think the other piece to the diversion process is we're trying to put a more formalized survey in place for students as they exit the diversion program so that we can really capture what are those moments during that diversion process that have been really helpful. What are their biggest takeaways? Last year we ran circles for kids that had been in diversion after the fact, and they had some really powerful conversations around some of the things that they walked away with, some of the skills, and not even knowing always like, hey, we have this in common. I didn't know that you were in the diversion program at some point too. So always looking for more, but it's an important part of what we're doing.
You said I get 6 questions. My last
Yeah.
question. Do we know what buildings show the most significant disproportionality in suspensions? And if we do we know what correction actions we've taken so far, corrective actions?
So I did not run individual building disproportionality for this. It is something that we could probably do and maybe should do for our next data unpack that we're gonna do with the buildings. We have done that in the past because I do remember being involved in conversations with building leaders around, especially around relative risk with students with disabilities and trying to drill down and figure out what are some of the interventions that we might need to put in place. So we can do that.
Thank you, Andrea.
Board member Alexandra, any other questions?
Yeah? No, go ahead.
Board member Jamaica?
Hey, so at the November 5th meeting, when the district was presented with tiered supports on how these interventions impact student learning, particularly in math and ELA, I asked, are we able to look at the success of our students who have actually had behavior interventions versus those who have had suspensions? And I was told yes. And we have a slide on here that talks about the MTSS system, but not that actual data point.
So help me understand exactly what you're looking for.
This still counts as my first question. She asked for clarification.
It's just clarity.
Students who are suspended versus students who have interventions. What do their academics look like, right? And I guess maybe even more specifically, I know it was on here. Which students who were suspended, which interventions did they receive before suspension? Because I know that someone stated, I'm really horrible with names, that there are several interventions before moving on to the next tier in the multi-tiered
Yep.
suspension. So which interventions actually happened before a student was suspended? Or how many suspensions happened without intervention?
You can look at, try and find a way.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, it's really hard to choose because there are so many questions. You mentioned that these are just out-of-school suspensions. You talked about 95% were less than 6 days. What is the highest behavior code for suspension?
The highest behavior code for suspension, well, they're leveled up through level 5.
Let me rephrase. What's the most frequently used code for suspension?
We didn't run that for tonight. We can.
Okay, all right. Number 3. What is the explanation for the fact that we still have such outrageous disproportionality when we have made all of these investments, which are absolutely important investments? I don't doubt that they're important investments, and I have my own theories as to why. But my theories aside, how do we explain the fact that Black students and students with disabilities still are facing such disproportionality with administrators suspending them?
I think it speaks to everything in the presentation. We have to be examining our beliefs, policies, practices, and then thinking about, it's part of the reason why we changed Christina's position, because Christina was a building leader. She was a principal in the district. And I think the work that she's doing side by side with principals to look at those systems and making sure that we're not in a place where we have to be reactionary because now there's a safety concern, but we're doing it in a systematic way to make sure kids have what they need. I think the success of MTSS implementation is the key to moving us forward.
I just have a clarifying question because I want to make sure I understand your response. So administrators are still being reactionary and using suspension instead of the MTSS system?
I would say to you, our MTS systems are not perfect yet. We have a lot of gaps, and I think that when I think about the elementary calls I get for suspension, as I mentioned, when you have someone who's now been physically aggressive towards a peer and has hurt another child, in those moments, there's all of these pieces around safety that have to be addressed. And then we've got to get together and figure out what is that plan. And sometimes a suspension needs to happen in order to preserve that safety in the moment and get right back. And it is something that they're challenged with every day in the buildings. And I see it up close and personal in the elementary because they have to call me for each of those. I'm also very personally in tune to the ones that are 6 days and more. So I know those systems we're a large system and we're going to continuously have to be working on this.
Thank you, Board Member Jamaica. Board Member Vivian.
I have clarifying questions that I'll ask first, and then I will ask my next question on the next round. So clarifying question number 1, on page 14 of the presentation, secondary suspension incidents and number of unique students by building. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the data accurately before I ask my next questions. Is this figure showing us the number of students suspended so far for Q1? And of that number, how many of them were unique students? Or is it showing us the number of suspensions only involving unique students in general with the number of unique students that were suspended?
No, so for example, Schenectady High School, quarter one of 25-26, had 261 incidents that involved 205 students. So sometimes they won't always match up because you might have like a incident that involves multiple kids.
Thank you for clarifying that. Part two to that question would be, if that's the case, it looks to me that if there are students who are repeatedly being suspended. So I guess what I would want to know on the back end, if there's a way for you to pull the data, how many suspensions actually reflect students who were suspended more than once for the same or similar behavior.
Okay.
Third clarifying question. I was trying to look for the data, and again, maybe, this is something that you'd have to get to us on the back end, but I was looking for comparatives. So we see the number of unique students that are being suspended in comparison to the enrollment rate for that particular unique student group. But what I'm not seeing is a comparison between the non-unique students versus unique students being suspended for the same incident. And the reason I'm asking for that data is because looking at the suspension rate and segregating that data just by the unique student group alone does not paint an accurate picture of the why. It's only giving us a portion of the what, but I do not feel like it's getting to the heart of why our students are being suspended.
Let me just make sure I understand what you're looking for.
So in other words, if you had at Schenectady High School, and I'm just gonna use basic round figures, right? If there were 100 students in a class, or in a building, 100 students out of the building, out of that 100 students, 50 of them are suspended. Of that 50, 35 of them were unique students. What I would want to know is, of those 35 unique students who were suspended, how many non-unique students were referred for the same behavior but then not suspended?
I'm gonna have to talk that one through with Natalie Cable.
Right, because if there's disproportionality, then it's gonna show up in the data.
Yeah. I mean, the way we run relative risk is how we look at disproportionality, but I think when we start drilling down, I just have to think about what's those calculations look like, because we also drill down sometimes for students with disabilities by race, and it's a different calculation to dig down another layer. So I just wanna make sure that we are getting, I may have to email you some questions once I talk to her.
I appreciate it, thank you.
I have very few questions, but only one was the chart that showed the races, and then it had a blue line and it had ELL and SW. Are the SWDs and the ELLs ever included in the 2 or more?
No, it's
No,
separate.
it's strictly the race on the 2 or more. That was.
Well, I shouldn't say that. Let me double check, but I think that within all of these recorded groups above, there are Ls and students with disabilities. But the bottom is the separate relative risk for just students with disabilities and Ls.
Okay, so you think there are SWDs in the
I
top part of the
I do.
thing? That was one question I had.
Yeah.
And the other I had is, when do we meet with the students? How is the delivery of the interventions, and or how does that happen? I mean, I can't see that from the data. I'm just asking about how we proceed in these things. We're really wrapped up in data here, so how do you actually deliver the services?
I'm gonna have Christina talk a little bit about that.
So depending on the tier would depend on how the intervention is looked at. Some of what we talked about here with like the Devereaux screening or the PBIS work, that's the tier 1 data. So in that moment, we're looking at trends across the building and we're not looking at individual students. So we might be looking at like, the majority of the referrals happen on a Wednesday or this time of day or in this space within the building or within this grade level. And then we'll dig down with teams into trying to figure out the root cause and then trying to come up with a building-wide plan to support that level of data school-wide. When we start getting into tier 2, we're looking more at individual students, and often we're working with grade level teams or building level teams to identify those students. We're coming together with some of the resources that were mentioned, whether it's RP specialists, counselors, social workers, AIS providers, and determining like what specific skill we want to target, how long we think that intervention should occur, and who will be providing the service and what data we're going to collect as a result of that. Typically, once a student's gone through multiple cycles of a tier 2, if they're still not responding, at that point we would do the school-based support team meeting, which would bring families and other providers into the mix as well, so that we could problem solve at a deeper level.
So, just to clarify,
Yes,
an incident occurs at 10 o'clock in the morning.
correct.
How soon before anything happens with regard to, as far as the student
So
is
I think-
concerned? Other than the safety concerns, should it involve another person and things like that?
So I think there's some differences, right? Like from the building level, I think when we're talking about the multi-tiered systems of support, we're trying to be preventative in that work and look at student data. Sometimes unfortunately it does occur after the fact that an incident or multiple incidents have occurred that the student's coming onto the radar. For attendance, it might be a certain level of days triggering that conversation. But that's different than like buildings will be responding immediately when, a behavioral incident occurs. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a twofold. As a principal, we had the system for, investigating and responding to incidents. And then in the background, we're running with our teams to try to look at preventatively each tier, what students need and how we're going to meet those needs.
Can I just add to that really quickly? The other piece, when an incident happens, especially if it involves a more egregious or serious or unsafe behavior, the team is debriefing about that incident, typically within 1 or 2 days, usually that same day, maybe the next morning. And they're reviewing any behavioral plans, support plans that are in place, and then they're ensuring that strategies, that everyone's on the same page with what strategies they're going to use to support that student going forward in terms of what's in the plan, and making sure that everybody's on the same page with those strategies and using those strategies.
Yeah, and I think one of those system pieces is like, I know Angela and some of our work is around, trying to make sure some of those pieces that should be occurring, like re-entry meetings after a student's suspended or out of school for extended a period of time, that they're happening more consistently, because that is a moment to problem solve with the student and with the family and to set them up for success in the return. So
10 o'clock in the morning, are they there till 2 or 3, or do they go home, or what happens?
I mean, I think that would depend on the individual.
Well, it would, but I mean, is that considered a suspension then if they're 4 hours and, please come back tomorrow and we'll discuss it at 8 a.m. or whatever?
And I think that was Ms. Tote Freeman's point, like we've been very clear with the data, like when we're asking students to reset and return, we have to capture that as a suspension, because by law that is removing them from instruction.
So I have a question around, let's see if I can work, how incidences are perceived if we have data. So subjective versus objective. If someone gets into a fight, hurts someone, that's more objective. But we can argue, you know, what happened prior to that versus subjective. Bernice Rivera has an attitude, and because of that attitude, they were given a consequence. So I'm just wondering, do we have data that kind of disaggregates the different offenses, the different types of behaviors?
Yeah, when they're logged into Infinite Campus, even if it's classroom managed, administrators are picking the code that most quantifies that behavior. If it's classroom managed, then they're resolving it as classroom managed, but they're still identifying the incident per the code of conduct as one of those codes. And I think some of what Ms. Tote Freeman was talking about was that ability to like clean up those codes. So over the years, some of those more subjective codes have been removed from the code of conduct.
Thank you. Then the other question I had, it's kind of board member Kathy had me thinking about this a little bit more in terms of spaces, right? In terms of where do we find that some of the incidences are happening? I know in the past it would be cafeteria, the gym. I'm just wondering, do we still have data around where these incidents are occurring?
Yes, so we do capture that data. A lot of, that information is some of the stuff that Dr. DeVries and I are looking at with buildings when we're reviewing both the Devereaux screeners and as well as like the quarter one data with them. And we are seeing, a lot of buildings with classroom incidents occurring, but also once EduClimber is up and running, that's disaggregating it very nicely for us as well.
And then without naming buildings, I'm wondering, are we seeing trends in certain behaviors in some buildings than others? So for example, Bernice School, there's a lot of fights in Bernice's school. Bernice is the name of the school.
Yes.
There are a lot of fights in Bernice's school. In Carlos's school, we see that there's a lot of bullying. So I'm wondering if we have any information that can be, I know that's drilling it down, and it's looking at referrals and things, but I wonder if we have looked at it that deeply.
Yes, so as this information is feeding from Infinite Campus into EduClimber, it becomes easier to drill down that way because when I'm isolating it by building, I can see the most used referral code in that building. It's a little, more tedious to pull out of Infinite Campus, but it is being entered there because that's what's feeding into the visualization part of EduClimber.
Okay, thank you.
We also look at threat assessment and DASA data and where those reports come from, if we feel like certain schools maybe need additional support around those pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any additional questions, board members? Board member Jamaica?
Yes, and Kathy, to your point about students with disabilities and English language learners versus the full group, the one thing that we did receive was the racial breakdown within students with disabilities. So while we don't have the reverse, not on this presentation, but we did receive the information that shows within students with disabilities by racial makeup what the disproportionality is, which is similar to what we have overall. I don't know if this counts as a question or a comment, but you talked about what the process is supposed to be when there's an incident. Because Kathy, you had asked, how do we deliver services and, what happens when an incident occurs? An incident occurs and then what happens? And there's the process that's supposed to happen. We know the process doesn't always happen in every building with every administrator. So how are we tracking the data about the process that's supposed to happen and whether or not it's happening? For instance, here's a timeline for you. If a student on a Friday afternoon is seen someplace they weren't supposed to be, it's communicated with administration. Admin then is going to investigate, because you had mentioned that, they're gonna investigate the incident. Those children don't even necessarily know that there is an investigation. They aren't necessarily notified, personal experience. Parents are not notified. It can go the entire weekend before a decision is made. And then there's supposed to be, depending on the incident, communication with the children, communication with the families. And there's a particular timeline, right, about when that's supposed to happen before the child receives the consequence. Anyone that might need to answer that, there's supposed to be parent notification before the consequence is communicated with the child, but that doesn't always happen. So how are we tracking?
I think when you look at Infinite Campus, you can see, like, I can go in and kind of audit the documents, the suspension notice, when was it completed, when did it go out, when did the charges go in, when was there a phone call, hopefully is getting logged also in the communications log. So we have the systems built there. Is it perfect and is it always exactly the way it's supposed to be? I mean, I would say probably not, but I think we're striving to make sure that that happens. In some of our secondary buildings, when things get really chaotic, I've seen it at the high school where they'll have, you know, a group altercation that involves like 10 kids, and sometimes they're trying to sort out who is involved in what's their role, have to review footage and all those things before they're making decisions, and sometimes it does take a little bit of time to sort through some of that. But I agree with you, students should have notification of what the issue is, parents should have immediate notification. Years ago when I worked at the high school, it used to drive me crazy when kids would end up in in-school suspension and didn't always exactly know why. Like, those processes should be happening. So we need to make sure that they're happening the way that they're supposed to.
And we would be able to see if that timeline and the processes are being followed and by which admin, and if they are or not.
I think you'd have to take a deep dive to look more globally. I could probably look like by student right now, the way our system is currently set up.
But each student has an admin name associated with them.
But I'd have to go through a student entire data file to look at all those different pieces of data. So just pulling a report isn't gonna do it. I'd have to like take a list of kids' names that we know were suspended and go in and look in all those multiple places to see those timelines. And sometimes I do that, right? If a parent comes down here and says, I have concerns because this happened, I do sometimes have to get in there and do that and partner up with the building to figure out what went wrong. So those things do happen sometimes.
Probably my final question. We tend to lean heavy on talking about and expressing the most severe incidences that could or do happen. But suspensions are not always for physical altercations. So what is the desegregated data for suspensions that do not involve physical, egregious, or state mandated, right? Like guns, we have no control over. If there's a gun, there's rules, nothing we can do about it. There are certain things that are mandatory, but how many of that 95% suspensions are not safety or violence concerns?
So I would say a lot of those decisions are driven by the code of character. And those are conversations we have through that committee where we're literally picking apart like what can happen, what's the highest level of consequence that can happen for this particular infraction, because the reality is there's some discretion with our building leaders at the building around what's happening, what's previously happened, is it progressive, is this like the third time this has happened? And so we try to shape a lot of that through the code of character decisions. And even this year, we were like moving codes around and saying, we don't want this in level 3 anymore, we want it in 2 because we're gonna say that the range of consequences is only this. Maybe it's based on the data we looked at from the year before and we saw, you know what, there's too much subjectivity in this, or there's too much happening. And we had a huge debate around this one code that has to do with like it was kind of like a disruptive code, but not a disruptive behavior, but it had to do with like making excessive noises or something. And we had a whole big debate about like, where does that really belong in here? It happened with the cell phone policy. Where do we want to limit those abilities? And so once we set that parameter, we have to have some trust and discretion within our building leaders to abide by that. Now, if they're suspending a second grade student for 5 days for a level 2, that is not allowed in the code of character. Like, those would be things that would be really problematic, but that code of character shapes where those boundaries are, if that makes sense.
I hear what you're saying.
Any further questions?
Okay, board member Vivian?
Hi, how are you? So I have like a book of questions. I promise you, I'm not gonna give you the whole book. On page 15 of the presentation.
Secondary suspension.
Yes, secondary suspension relative risk ratio.
Yeah.
So, for example, we're looking at the reported groups for Hispanic students, quarter 1 of this year. 143 Hispanic students were suspended so far in quarter 1. And of that number, that made up 24% of the Hispanic enrollment. Help me understand
The
this.
total enrollment of Hispanic students is 24%.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to understand based on this data, to go back to my original clarifying question, we do see that there is a remarkable number of unique students that are being suspended. We don't know what they're being suspended for. We don't know what restorative practices they participated in prior to leading up to the suspension. We also don't know how many of these students, they were suspended multiple times. We don't know how many of them were suspended for the same infraction. I'm asking this, and looking at the race overall, I feel like it only gives us a surface level glimpse into the disciplinary practices of our school district. And what I want to caution us against doing is, though well-intended, accidentally run the risk of applying malintent of bias or prejudice against our faculty and our administrators, and then come next semester, we're running Sharon Tahoe ragged, asking her to give us data about recruitment and retention rates. So the racial data alone does not give us the accurate picture of what's happening in our schools. That's just my personal 2 cents on that. Board member Jamaica did already ask this question, and I would love to see this information. What are the behavioral codes that are most driving the suspensions?
Yeah, we can get that.
Last question. As far as the restorative practices are concerned, what I would like to see is more narrowed down data on the outcome of the restorative practices. So how many students are receiving restorative practice total? And of that number, how many of them are still lining up being suspended at a later date?
So the chart that we showed you with restorative practices are interventions that they've done with students this quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So are those unique students? I can't say that. Like if we look at those numbers, Natalie can probably tell us, like if they've done 59 conflict coachings, was some of it with the same student a few times? Because that's the number of interventions that they've done. So we could look at that part of it. But the other part that Angelo mentioned around having them start tracking when they know for sure that the intervention has prevented a suspension or a conflict that we know is blooming. We have some of that data. They started tracking that data, I just don't know that they're tracking it with fidelity yet to put it out there, but we have seen them start to track that. We have a mechanism for them to track that.
And we could, again, we'd have to drill down, but we could look at if they received RP prior to suspension or how many times they did.
Well, I think I would really appreciate that, and I think that information would actually be very, very helpful with what we are investing in restorative practices. And look, my own child has benefited from restorative practices, so firsthand I'm saying that they are crucial to our students' development. But I think that if we could really get a raw picture of, you know, how much of the restorative practices might actually be preventing a suspension for that same student, that might help us narrow down what we're doing for our restorative practices. That might help us better target what we are doing for certain behaviors to further reduce the suspension, right? Because the data shows that there's an overall reduction in suspension, but it's not telling us if there's been a reduction in the actual behavior that would have led to the suspension. So without that information, one could infer that we're merely changing how the behavior is being reported as opposed to making a dent on the behavior itself. And if we're not making a dent on the behavior itself, then can we truly say that we were positively impacting the overall culture and climate in our buildings?
We could look at that reduction around referral types. I think, you know, you asked for referrals or the actual infractions. We can look at that, but I think you're also talking about looking at referrals. And are there referrals where kids have been suspended in the past who are now not being suspended? And my question then would be like, what have we figured out for those students that works for them, that we found a different way to meet their needs?
Absolutely. Like I understand, you know, the importance of casting that wide net initially, which is what we've done. But now that we've been, you know, engaging in restorative practices for a few years, I think now is time for us to start filtering out some things if necessary, so we can have an even larger positive impact on the overall suspension of our students.
Board Member Cassie?
This is a really sensitive question, and I apologize for asking it, but I've been around too long. Back a few years ago, there was a lot of concern on the part of staff, teachers, administrators, name it, that they were being tracked for suspending Black and brown students more than Caucasian students or Hispanic students or whatever. What are we doing with regard to looking at, or are we looking at the race of the person administering the justice, shall I say, or in regard to whom they're speaking, or are we doing any of that kind of thing? I mean, because actually, I mean, I had faculty members or whatever say to me, I'm being told I'm having problems with more Black students than I am with white students and so forth. Or you know, I'm administering things more harshly that way. What are we doing about that, or do we? How do we respond, or whatever?
I think we're trying to take a balanced approach with what does your data say, and we're teaching teachers to look at all of their data and try and use a data protocol to think about their own practices. Like, we have to be comfortable with getting better at getting better, and so that includes our district administrators, our building administrators. Like, when we unpack data with them together, we have to, and that's some of the equity work that Leah's talking about, we have to be able to look at the full picture of data and dissect it and figure out what are we doing to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes for kids. And I don't think that messaging of like, don't suspend children if you have to, merely because of race, is the message right now. I do know the historical context around some of that, so I do know what you're talking about. But I think we're really pushing for, back then, we didn't have a lot of resources either. And we didn't have a lot of ways to meet kids where they are. And we've put a ton of things in place in the last several years. And then COVID did not help at all. So So trying to get those systems back up and running, so we're not throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the ceiling and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And we're doing it in a systematic way so that we can check return on investment. Those are all things that we see as priorities.
So you have that data, should it ever
We
come
could
up?
pull it if we had to.
If you have to. Just wondering, okay, thank you.
Board Member Alexandria?
You said something, you said we gotta get comfortable with getting better, what was the phrase
Getting
you
better
used?
at getting better.
Getting better and getting better. That brings me to my question, and I think is really for us as a board. We've had some thought-provoking comments and feedback and needing additional information from Andrea and her team, right? And they're gonna say they're gonna get this information, and then we never call them back. And then it takes 6 or 7 months. I think that we need to, as a board, get better. We're getting better because we've tasked them with doing the research and gathering the numbers, and then we never call them back to kind of plug the pieces to our questions and concerns together.
Thank you, Board Member Alexandria, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's interesting you said this, because under unfinished business, the next step is for the board to process tonight's data and then at a future meeting, discuss the purpose, scope, and potential costs or resources implications of an audit. After that discussion, the board can determine either at that meeting or a later one, whether an audit is the right direction. Once a decision is made, the item can be placed on a future agenda for the full board consideration. Okay. So we will move to public or board comments.
I just wish everyone a joyful holiday season and hope that you'll enjoy the many concerts and or whatever that are being presented in the next 3 weeks. I don't even dare to try listing them.
Stay tuned for my
Stay
email.
tuned because for your weekly letter, your weekly listing. So because we're not back till the 17th, and so that's just a week before the actual holiday. So I know that all those concerts and so forth, winter concerts and will be taking place. Thank you.
Board Member Jamaica.
The greatest number of phone calls and emails and text messages that I get are from parents and students inside our district around discipline, around suspension, around how they are treated and how they feel inside our buildings. They're not positive calls. They're not. And I don't speak about staff to point them out, except for the point that it's the institution and the systems to in which they are beholden. And if we as an institution do not give the tools, training, and accountability to our staff to fully implement the restorative practices, then we will continue to see the data that we've seen for my entire life. If there are staff who are more likely, regardless of their race, that are more likely to suspend our Black students or our students with disabilities, the executive leadership team needs to know. To offer what I had said in my opening comments, the training and tutelage for them to do better, for them to understand the errors that they're making that don't align with the mission and vision that we say that we have. Because we can always find the good. There's good. I don't deny that there's good. There absolutely is good. But it's not good enough that we don't still face the disproportionality in our district. These are not new numbers. It is the existence. And what little progress we started to make, because while we're looking at, and Andrea said that at one point it was 3 times the rate, and we made it down to 2 point something, but it's trending back upwards again for some of our students. So somewhere in the mix, our restorative practices are not landing. And whether it's within the implementation or the execution or who gets it or how, and every time a question was asked, the first thing I thought was, And what is the breakdown by race and gender? We don't have gender in here. So we don't know that either. If there's a trend amongst our young men or our young girls or our trans students, we have no idea. We do have the power and the opportunity to ensure that all of the programs are implemented with fidelity, which I got that word from Bernice, that's where I got it from, with fidelity before we do an assessment. Because if we assess without implementation, I'll just.
Board Member Jamaica, any other last comments? Board Member Vivian?
So Andrea and to everyone else that presented this evening, I recognize that it was a lot. You gave us a lot of data, which meant that you did a lot of work to obtain the data and to break it down and explain it to us like we are five, right? And I really appreciate that. And I know that even, you know, comments and questions from myself, they may have come across as, you know, being under a firing squad. I promise you that was never my intention at all. This is a difficult conversation to have for many, many reasons, for many different people. So I appreciate the work that you put into providing us with this information, and I also appreciate the work that you are doing to improve the overall culture and climate for our students. With that said, when I looked at the presentation and the enrollment figures of our unique student population, and I'm horrible at math, but our unique students made up approximately 80-85% of our total student enrollment. My personal perspective is this, and I recognize that I'm probably the outlier here, but a school district that carries the majority of the unique student population that population is naturally going to carry a larger number of disciplinary measures. That's math. That does not immediately imply malintent, ill will, or improper practice. However, that data is never going to change unless the enrollment changes or the type of incidents change. That data is pretty much going to be around the same until we continue to do the work that we're doing and see that reduction little by little each and every single year. But I stand by what I said earlier, and I want to close with this. If we don't have the additional context, the race data alone is meaningless, because our children are not just the color of their skin. Our children are not just their gender. They are not just the external factors that make up who they are. They have emotion and heart and issues, real issues that they're dealing with, and they don't know how to quantify those issues. And those issues oftentimes have a direct impact on their behavior. So I would love to see us continue to do what we've been doing, which is focusing on getting to the heart of our children to make a true improvement, not to just the behavior in the classroom, but how they see themselves overall. So that would have a long-standing impact on how they conduct themselves, not just in the classroom, but out in the world as well.
Thank you, Board Member Vivian. Board Member Alexandria.
I want to say thank you to Andrea and her team for presenting tonight, and you left me with get better to get better. And I think that as a board, we're all committed to getting better and working with you to get better, making sure that we're doing better data collection so that we can report out to the board what really needs to be reported out, not all the time just the apples and the butterflies, so that we can really address the real work that has to happen in our district together. So thank you.
And I do want to thank our district in general for attacking the tough conversations. These are not easy conversations. Many school districts don't even touch it, and I'm being honest. And I think it's very important for us to continue doing this for our kids, for our district, to shed light. And you said it, you know, it's a work in progress, right? You've been I feel very transparent about the areas of growth, but also you have shine the light on things that we're doing well. And I do think it is good to balance both, right? What is going well, but what are things that we need to work on? So I do truly want to appreciate that you reveal the data, and that might have been really difficult to for all of us to engage. And I do like that saying that you said, what is it again?
Getting better. Get better at getting better.
Yeah.
Better at getting
Yeah,
better.
and that's something that all of us need to do, because you are not alone in this work. The board is also part of it, and so is our staff. So I do want to thank you, and the conversation will continue. You must have read my mind from my script, okay? But we'll talk about when the next one, and that, again, so everyone knows, that's a board decision, because we do have agendas already planned out. But then we can decide as a board when is the time that we can continue having these conversations. So thank you again. Thank you.
I'd like to also just,
Sure.
one, thank the team for the presentation, but really thank the board. I mean, the board has invested a great deal and has supported a lot of the work that was discussed today. And get better at getting better, whatever the phrase was, that's the work. I mean, this is a priority for us as a district, and so I think the dialogue and the discourse that took place is reference to where we know we want to be. Is the work that we have ahead of us, but we couldn't do this without the support that the board has provided in the last 3 years, and we're building it, and we've got to prioritize it as we move this forward. But I just want to just also thank the board for this work.
Okay, and as Kathy said, happy holidays to everyone, because we won't see you until next year. Let's say that. But at this.
We got one more.
Oh, go ahead.
So we got one more.
17th.
Oh, that's right, I'm jumping ahead.
They don't get to talk.
Yeah. So the board will enter into executive session to discuss several personnel matters. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Board Member Kathy. Second? Thank you, Board Member Alexandra. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.